enjoy. It's Saturday morning. It's terribly rainy. I've got my dog at my feet here and my cat in the windowsill. And I am going to read something I would have probably done anyway today. Bliss, Afterlife. It is the story about a reincarnation. The story is starts with Bliss dying at 95 after her birthday. This is a little while ago. I'm now well into the story. I started it in 2006, but we are now quite a long time on, I'd say, after 2015 anyway. So, chapter 96, Holly and Tony. Holly had just finished putting the washing away when she heard Tony whistle outside. She was so pleased to see him and had been meaning to ring him since they got back from London, but had not had a chance. She knew he had spent time at his new girlfriend's. She was definitely his girlfriend now, in her eyes anyway. Perfect timing, Tony, she hugged him. I made a soup and was just going to have some. Your dad just took off to play tennis. I didn't fancy it today. Oh, lovely. I was hoping you would feed me. I had such a lovely time, Mum. She took his hands and looked into his big brown eyes. She loved looking at him. All through the years, he was beautiful to her. And now he looked like a man, almost. She had to smile to herself. Will he ever be that to her, she wondered. Yes, I gathered that from your short texts. I would have worried why you didn't pop in whilst David was here, but I reckon you had your own amazing time. I have not seen your auntie so full of beans and happy for a long time. We had a really good start to the new year. Well, in fact, I just got a text from Ben saying that they want to come down here. They have both not met Melanie and now they have more time. It's almost flat free. He's going to get in touch with you anyway, but I was hoping it's okay. Melanie is keen to meet both of them. I'm keen to meet her, Holly laughed. Who is this girl who you are so smitten with? Tell me more. And have you got a picture? Oops, no, I forgot, but she took some New Year's Eve. I shall ask her to send some. Not now. Tell me, I want to hear it all. I speak to Susan later. Would be great to all meet up. David is renting right now and will start looking into buying a place soon. But I think they were talking of coming down here on the weekend again. And I'm sure Maisie will come. Maybe Faye and Ben can stay till the weekend. You never guess who I saw in London the other day. Come with me into the kitchen. We have a lot to catch up on. My dear. I better get started on reheating the soup. And yes, by the way, the flat is clear. And there's no problem with them staying there. Tony followed his mum into the kitchen. It was so lovely and warm, and he saw she had baked the bread. He settled down to listen to the encounter with Silvana and was happy to wait telling her about Melanie. Somehow he wasn't sure he could explain to his mum exactly the way he felt. She already felt such a part of his life, and his mum had not even met her. He could barely understand it himself, but he felt happy just thinking about her. Chapter 97. Susan in the Refuge. Susan was quite glad to get back into the swing of things in the Refuge. She had so enjoyed the last few days, had hardly thought of this place, and needed a little distance for herself to think about David and their conversations. She had sat down to inspect the to-do list she'd done before Christmas. Not once had she looked at it, even when she was here in the Refuge over the last 3 weeks. Sinead and her 3 children were gone, so was Dilly and Winston, along with Rosie and Isabel and their children. It felt almost empty. She could only hear Anna upstairs hoovering. She had helped to look after the place during her absence. There had been 4 new arrivals during the week right after the New Year, and she sat down to gather her thoughts and familiarize herself with the details. She went to put some quiet background music on and started to look at the names of the new arrivals. David. There was a little boy called David with his mother Julia, and another woman, Patricia, who had been with them before, about a year ago, with her 5-year-old little Dottie, or Dorothy. Her mind got stuck on David. She was so looking forward to seeing him in a couple of days. They had decided to go back to Dorset and walk. They had so much to talk about, and she felt they had barely scratched the surface. He was going to come to the Refuge and pick her up. He had heard so much about this place, and he was curious. She looked forward to showing him around. The newly decorated rooms looked lovely, most still empty, but Anna's parents were due, and Anna was happily going around the house cleaning, as she was impatient now to see them. Susan had offered her a permanent job of help. She could not pay much, but it would help both of them. Susan felt she needed more time for herself. Having met David, she realized that her life was immersed in work with the Refuge, and she suddenly felt she needed more time for herself. Her phone bleeped, and she was pleased to see a lovely message from David. He had looked at some flats online, but was completely at a loss where he wanted to be, and was she free for a drink tomorrow night. He'd gone back to his Aunt Lenie's place, and was driving back to London tomorrow morning. She had typed yes before she could even think about it, and pulled herself together. None of these jobs will get done by themselves, she thought, and focused on the paraphernalia which seemed to fill her life. Stop staring into the distance, she thought to herself, and got down to do some work. Seeing David tomorrow seemed to have given her a little jolt. She felt excited. Get on with it, Susie Q, she laughed to herself. How much she liked being called that by him. It made her feel young and carefree. I wonder if Susie Quattro feels the same about her name. Chapter 98. David. David considers a move. David had not felt like going back to the London flat he had rented, as it had been available and had been convenient, but he had forgotten what London was like. He had always loved that city, but spending time at the coast was nicer, and he loved staying at his aunt's. Maisie seemed incredibly busy. He was amazed how quickly she had settled in, and was saying on the phone the other day that she thought of sharing a flat with a newfound friend in Camden. He remembered Camden as lively and young. Well, he had been young when he occasionally went to the Loch. His aunt was out, and he had the place to himself. He had settled in the girls' room. He smiled. This room was so lovely. It was not particularly girlish, actually. He also liked it. His aunt had deliberately furnished it with his girls in mind. A big double bed with an Indian-type bedspread, beautiful pale mauve walls, and the window looked out into the pretty garden, which was long and fairly narrow. He looked at the pictures on the wall. They depicted a poster with the signs of the zodiac, a beautiful print of two young girls, one a teenager, the other a small girl, holding hands, looking out to the bright turquoise sea. You could only see their backs. One had a little polka dot dress on. The other wore shorts, but both had long hair and were clearly girls. The colors were wonderful, and he tried to see who painted it, and then realized it was not a print at all, but an original drawing behind glass. It just said L 1998. The L was large and flowing. He stepped back to look at it again, and then realized they looked like his girls, Trudy and Maisie. Well, he was not sure, as the drawing was almost like a sketch, but he smiled. Lenie painted that, he thought. It looked great. He knew his aunt dabbled, as she called it, with painting, but they had not talked about this recently. He looked around. There was another at the other wall, a sort of rural scene somewhere in Asia, as the houses were more like huts, but on stilts, ladders coming down, roofs like thatch, and a temple glinting in the background. People were milling around, carrying produce on their heads, or a man was carrying 2 baskets on a stick across his shoulders, each side balancing the other. It looked so peaceful. Remote, for sure. He had to ask his aunt where this was. The signature was illegible, but it was another original, he noticed. Beautiful scene in a lovely frame. He had laid down on the bed. Having connected his phone to the stereo, he was amazed about the details his aunt had thought of when she created this room for the girls, or anyone who came and stayed overnight. He switched some gentle music on and looked at the scene ahead of him on the wall. What must it feel like to live in a place like that? It seemed oxen were used, and to him it seemed to depict a scene long, long ago. His mind drifted to the last week. He had really enjoyed being with Susan again. The New Year's Eve had been so much fun. Was it all of that which made him feel so excited and anxious at the same time? He took his notebook and looked back. He tended to write when he had something to say to himself. He smiled. The last few years had been great, really. He had taken much time for himself. In fact, he had to get used to taking this time, as his life had been so busy for so long. Sitting with these old friends last week, talking about all their lives how all their lives had unfolded since they sat together almost 40 years ago, was wonderful. It had not mattered that Monica and Tim were not part of the memories, nor was Chris, but everybody had become quite deep in discussion how often they felt that they had done what they really wanted to, that they had not done what they had really wanted to, or had continued with what they knew and felt they had to sustain themselves with, but to sustain the status quo with, but it was not what they had really wanted to do. One thing they had all agreed on: hindsight is 20/20 vision. He had not had conversations of this kind for a long time. His life in Australia was much concerned with taking care of the girls and Margaret. He had fun with the girls, but that was generally reserved for the few holidays he took between his business times. He had developed a great relationship with Maisie over the last couple of years, and he had been happy to help her when her relationship broke apart. Living by himself, he had so much room in the old family house, and he had already decided to sell it. Trudy was so involved in her own life with children and husband running the business together, and she seemed to be doing fine. He could imagine them visiting. He really wanted a permanent place to live. Not in London, though. He had decided that also. He was determined to follow his intuition there, but meeting Susan had put everything topsy-turvy again. He looked back at some entries of the past year. He had felt content. The reason to come to England was the want for adventure and discovery, connecting with old friends. He suddenly realized that he had not really intentionally contacted anyone, and still came across them in the most easy manner. Consciousness is everything, and everything evolves. The song they had played kept going around in his head. His aunt mentioned that she had put away some old stuff when his parents had both passed. She had cleared their household and found some of his stuff. He got up to search for it. There was a beautiful desk and a narrow wardrobe which had drawers at the bottom. He opened the top one and almost exclaimed out loud when he saw the old notebook, his handwriting on the cover. The Songs of David. Original work and lyrics. Thoughts and meanderings of David Spring. He couldn't believe it. He had to see what David Spring of old had to say to old David Spring. Not so old, he chided himself. I feel great, better than I have for a long time. He sat down to look at his entries, and time almost disappeared. To reach my destination, I need to consider myself to be an eternal student. It is a little ironic that I seem to feel the need to write, so even to myself I have to find a means to talk. Ever the gas bag. He smiled. He remembered writing this. He'd had a day of silence somewhere. He decided that there was somehow he had decided that there was too much talking, and he had taken himself off to the woods for 2 whole days. There's only an hour of silence left, and I feel I need more. Strange. He tried to remember who he had to get back to talking, but he couldn't. My thoughts create my life. I'm here amongst the green, and if I created this, I am a master. He remembered feeling empowered a lot of the time. He was reading a lot and often took himself off to the woods, even as a young boy. Do not burden anyone with a responsibility for your happiness. Take responsibility for all that yourself. He was shaking his head. How had his life gone, knowing all that already 40 years ago? In those days he was so smitten with Susan. Amidst the music and all other friends he had felt inspired, and he could feel the others were inspired by him. Then he had decided that he had to leave. He had been in love with Susan, but it felt totally not ready to commit, and he knew she wanted commitment and children and all that. Funny to think, not so very long after that, he was married and had a child, feeling always responsible for everyone's happiness, and guilty when they were not. He was glad Maisie has been so enthusiastic when he mentioned England. She was already the adventurous one. Trudy was firmly anchored in her life, he thought. I'm glad I have them in my life. Gosh, he closed the book. He might have known much deep down then, but he often had not actually done what he loved doing most, which had been being with Susan and his friends, playing the guitar, writing lyrics. Was he worried that he had missed something? Having Maisie here and Trudy with a happy family back in Australia, he could not say he felt something was missing. In any case, he felt great. All I have to do is make sure I keep well, and I could have another long relationship, the way I wrote about it back then, he thought. He decided to take up his aunt's offer of her membership card and go for a swim and a steam. If he was going to get old, he better follow in his aunt's footsteps, who was already as old as he used to hope to be, and as active. Up he was, looking for his trunks. The suitcase started to look decidedly messy. He had stayed away longer than he thought. He was going to ring Susan and talk to her, he thought. Drive back tomorrow morning. His thoughts were racing again whilst he was packing a bag. He'd see her tomorrow. He felt like talking to her would be so lovely, and his heart started beating faster again. This is ridiculous, he thought. My thinking seems to stray back to her even worse since looking back at my old words, or words of old. He got his keys and left his aunt's. Chapter 99. Holly, Ben and Faye at Bliss flat. Holly was at her mother's flat, making sure all was well. She liked coming here, and any excuse would do. Not that she needed any to visit the flat, it was often empty, but she loved being here and felt it is so cozy to meditate and connect with her mum. Ben and Faye were due any minute. She had bought a few provisions for them until they had settled and had a chance to go shopping. Ben had texted her and Tom was picking them up from the station. She had put some aroma oil into a couple of burners. Their mother had had so many, and her oils were all still here. They seemed to have kept fine over the years, and she loved the choice. In fact, she had bought a few new ones herself, as she could never resist the lovely smell of clary sage or geranium. The flat felt so calm and serene. She put some music on and sat on the lovely daybed to look out over the sea. Her mother had loved this place, and so did she. Bliss had had such a beautiful retirement here, and she promised herself to look in downstairs on her way home, as she had not seen Margaret for a while. They had been great neighbours to her mum. She heard a whistle and looked out of the back window so she could see Tom with Ben and Faye coming up the path. She decided to run downstairs to open the lobby door for them. Faye looked very pregnant now. Everybody hugged, and Faye exclaimed that this was absolutely gorgeous. They all looked out over the sea, which was just across the little road. "Come in, everybody. It's just up these steps." Everybody filed in, and the lovely smell led them into the second floor flat apartment. Holly waved everybody into the flat, and they all commented on the aroma and the view, which was indeed picture book. The sea and the sun, and a glimpse of the beach further down the cliff. "Oh, I know you said your mum lived in a beautiful place, but this is stunning." She stepped out onto the balcony and opened her arms, reaching up. "I love it. I'm so glad we decided to come. It's quite chilly though." "Yes, come in." We closed the door. The view was the same. My mum was determined to have a big window. An idea of where she wanted to retire to was quite clear. I remember her searching for just the right place. Oh, and she found it. Ben took his wife into his arms. "We shall have a lovely few days here." "Yes, but maybe all I want to do is lie here and look out." Faye had plonked herself up on the daybed amongst the cushions and looked happy and radiant. Her hands on her belly, she pulled her feet onto the daybed. "I get quite tired and then have bursts of vitality. Right now," she pretended to fall back and closed her eyes to sleep. Everybody laughed and all sat down to catch up on news and happenings. 2012. Sounds quite futuristic, they all thought. Everybody had had a great New Year's Eve, and much was to be reported. "By the way, Faye has named our baby Lydia." Ben and Faye smiled at each other. "Ah, so you know the sex?" Holly was interested. She had always felt that she would have a boy, and although she had not fixed on any particular sex when Tony came, she felt she knew he would be male and looked just like she had imagined. Yes and no. I did not get this information from a doctor, Faye laughed. No, she just knows it. She dreamt of Lydia, who said, "Hello, Mummy," in the dream. Ben wanted to hear what everybody would say to that. He knew his Aunt Holly was very spiritual. He also knew his mum often thought his Ormy and aunt were ridiculous with their talk of spirit and such like. Being in his Ormy's flat made him feel close to her. There were some nice pictures of the family and friends around the flat, and he brought a couple to show to Faye. That was my Ormy when she was young. Doesn't she look great? She must have been about 30 here. I don't know who the other lady is. Does anyone? But no one did. Here is Ormy with you, Holly, and my mum. The picture showed 2 teenage girls and in their midst Bliss, who looked happy. Trees in the background, a great photograph. You would have got on well with my mum. Holly had made tea and was handing out mugs. She would be happy to hear that you dreamt of your little girl already. So, you reckon this is what's going to happen, Holly? What do you think, Tony? I would never argue with a woman's instinct, Tony laughed. After spending much time with Melanie recently, I'm definitely sticking with that. Tony knew that his mother was always relying on her gut. In fact, she never felt unwell. If she ever felt unwell, it was usually her stomach, which hurt. Did you dream of me then, Mum? Tony wanted to know. He had never asked, and his childhood to him was a string of events and adventures, some boring school years, but he was usually with Ben, who was never far away. He couldn't remember much before his 7th birthday, unless he saw a particular photo. I wish I had, his mum smiled, looking at a baby picture which showed Tony in his grandmother's arms. No, I just knew you would be a boy. I didn't say much at the time, because I would have been equally happy with a girl. I'm so happy now that we have a little girl in the family. I know I'm not the grandma, but you can bet that I shall see much of little one, as much as I can. Holly sat herself next to Faye and hugged her. Have you got any baby pictures of Ben here? Ben knew there were some in the bedroom, and he got a couple of lovely photos. Here is me, with Ormy and my mum and dad in the background. She loved this picture, and I remember she said to my mum that she was not going to put it away because they had separated. We were happy then, and we should celebrate that. He loved this picture. It almost made him remember the feel of his Ormy's arms around him. Her house always smelled nice. He remembered that from way back. This is so cute. What a beautiful baby you were, Ben. So much hair. Look at your dad's blue eyes. And I can even see your mum's. Greyish. Blue, look here. Your Ormy's eyes were green. The photograph was still so clear behind the glass, and they all gazed at the 4 people in the frame. Here is Ormy with Tony and Ben, both toddlers sitting on Ormy's lap together. Look at the dripping ice creams. Holly remembered when she took this one in Ormy's garden in London. They had argued just before about the size of the scoop. Here they looked so cute, vaguely mischievous, carefree, smiling. And now you're going to be a dad. Tony put his arms around Ben. They were almost of equal height. Ben hugged him back. Ah, yes, and you were a boyfriend, I hear. Ben finally wanted to talk a bit more about Melanie. When are we going to meet her? Ben went to get another tea, and Tony followed him into the kitchen, leaving Holly and Faye chatting about their babies and their childhood and babies and food cravings. I thought tonight. Tony had already mentioned it all to Melanie, and she was keen to meet them. He didn't feel like saying too much about it, and he'd rather they just met her soon. Yes, great. We shall chill here for a bit, then go up the high street to do some shopping, and why don't you both come here tonight and we eat together? Let's ask Faye how she feels. They both wandered back into the kitchen. Ben was none the wiser, but he would meet the girl who turned his cousin's head around tonight. Shall we have Tony and Melanie around tonight for dinner? He smiled at Faye. They sounded all so couple-like, and Holly thought the same. Everybody laughed. Fabulous, my son and nephew are having dinner party with their partners. She clapped her hands, as if that had been a joke between her and Susan when the boys had been playing up when they were very small. That sounds great. I would love it. I make a nice dinner for us, Ben. Ben and I are into fusion food. Ben laughed. Fusion simply meant she cooked predominantly Chinese and Ben cooked a nice Indian curry, as well as typically home-cooked food. He had often helped out at the Refuge with preparing big meals, and his dad enjoyed Indian cooking. Often that was what they had done together when he visited Steve growing up. Great idea. I make a curry and you make a chow mein. We leave you guys to sit here. Tony, shall I drive you back to your house? I want to go shopping myself and I can drop you. I speak to Susan later. I know she intends to come down with David. Everybody seems to be in love around me at the moment. Holly had got up and carried the mugs out. Tony followed her, getting his jacket. That's true, he thought. I'm definitely in love, but I shall keep that to myself for a bit longer. Okay, see you later then. When shall we come? Tony kissed Faye on the cheek. Come at 7. We have all afternoon to sort ourselves out, and we will be hungry again by then. I want to walk up the high street to look at all the interesting and English shops. Faye relished all the new experiences. She had travelled a bit in her time, but to see a new place with friends surrounding her felt so lovely. She felt the baby move. I can feel her all the time now, she thought. So much there, with me, in me, feeling what I feel. Do you think my baby knows what I feel, Holly? Oh, now I don't know where this stopped, and I don't want to read a whole chapter again, so I finish here. Sorry. Happy Saturday.